Welcome back to the Kirkpatrick Podcast. So we are continuing our conversation from last week. So if you've not listened to or watched last week's episode, definitely recommend catching that after this one, because it's definitely a good conversation about kind of the state of where we are when it comes to measurement and evaluation. So most organizations are very good at measuring activity. We know how many people attended, how many completed, an activity or event or training intervention, how many clicked things, right? How many, checked the happy face on the smile sheet. We can report quickly. We can see some trends over time when you start to collect the same sort of data over and over again. And we can usually explain all of this in a single slide. And because of all of this, these metrics of attendance, completion, smiles, clicks, views, they became the default. They became the easy button. And they feel, because they're, tracked in some sort of official report or dashboard, if you will, they feel like they're like objective data points. They feel good. They make us feel safe. But I want to challenge you and remind you that activity is not performance. And today, what I want to sit down and talk to you about is why measuring what's convenient has become one of our biggest barriers to understanding what actually is happening in our organizations. We can spend a lot of time blaming everything else and everyone else in our organization as to why we are not measuring the higher level things and all of that. But we also have to take some time to do some reflection inside and say, what are we doing to also enable these activity or vanity metrics to be what we are just basically reporting on? I think these activity type metrics, these level 1 reaction, did you like something? These level 2 learning, how many people completed the tests and all of that, they can dominate for a very simple reason. It's easy. Most of our software programs or our learning programs, our survey platforms will analyze this data and give us the report back to us without us having to do a lot. They're easy. These activity metrics are easy for us to find and collect. We own them, so they're easy to standardize. They're easy to defend when someone asks for proof, right? You can pull up the list of everyone that attended. You can pull up the report with all of the scores. They create a sense of control that we have, that once we start measuring and diving into behavior and performance and impact on the organization, we don't have control. We don't. There's a whole system, there's a whole environment that influences what's happening in the organization and what's influencing that person, that it becomes very easy for us to not even dabble with those because we cannot control them. And as someone that is a resident control freak, just ask anybody that's ever tried to assist me in life. They're like, when are you going to give up some of these reins? I'm like, oh, never. It's very hard. I like to own my future. I like to own, control a lot of things. It's very hard for me to turn completely away. It was actually one of the biggest challenges for me when I worked at Anchored. When Anchored was really like out there doing a lot of course development, bringing in others to do training development and have more of that front-facing client role was very challenging for me. To not want to come in and make sure that none of the balls dropped, right? And make sure that things were to my standards, and I could control the client experience and their satisfaction because I knew that I could deliver. But that was hard, real hard, y'all. To give up some of that. It took a lot of reflection, a lot of therapy, and I'm not gonna lie and tell you that like I've figured it all out either. But we're working on it, little by little, every little thing. Lately, I'm like, guys, I want no part of being part of this. Just let me do what I do best. But yeah, that is definite. So I feel you. I definitely understand why we want to stick to doing things that we can own and control the outcome. And it's not just the outcome, but it's knowing that we can control the entire process, how we gather it, and all of these things. And I want you to know that I'm not dogging you or telling you that like because you collect your vanity metrics or your activity metrics, you're wrong. You're not wrong. These are still useful data points. But I want you to ask yourself, who is it useful for? And if the answer is for yourself, please don't report it to your C-suite. They don't actually care. They don't care about the number of hours that you're training people. They're going to start to wonder why people are in that many hours of training, and could they use AI to speed up some of this stuff so they can get those people back into their like seats and like, doing their actual jobs. Tell you 100%, that is what they're thinking. So if you have that on your report for like a recap of 2025, let's pull that one off now. Attendance and completion and engagement, they matter. You need to know these things. But I also want you to know that convenience is not the same as usefulness. And the danger isn't that we measure the activity, we measure at the lower levels, right? Like level 1 reaction, level 2 learning. It's that we stop there. When we think about what we get out of our activity metrics and our, the level 1 and 2 data, they're going to tell you the story about what happened, right? They're going to tell you, did someone have a good experience in the training? Was there something about the training that needed additional massaging or just like additional time for folks to really reflect on it and really be able to take that concept and understand it, right? To be able to actually apply it to performance. It's going to tell you those sorts of things. And if you do it right, and you're also gathering data on confidence and commitment at level 2, you're going to have amazing data, especially if you then tie that also in with level 1 relevance. Girl, you're going to have some good data that will help shape future interventions. But it's not going to tell you whether people can actually perform in real conditions. You can have all of the simulations in the world, all of the role plays, everything that you can do at level 2 to simulate the real world environment. It will not tell you for 100% certainty that people can actually perform when the rubber hits the road. Especially when we're talking about high pressure environments and trainings, right? And like industries. Like I think about the thing that's been running through my head as I've been talking about this is like the medical field, right? Like, look, I want my doctor, my surgeon to practice on all of the dummies before they decide to practice on my actual body. Please simulate. And I've been I went to Montreal, oh my gosh, 2 years ago. February used to be 2 years. Oh, that was the best trip. Thank you so much to the Montreal, to the hospital system in Montreal for sending me there. I keynoted for their symposium, and it was just Montreal in February, though snowy, was probably the best. Oh, so good. Anyway, I saw they had a state-of-the-art training facility where they had all of the dummies and all of the things, and I saw all of it. Yes, great. I want them to have so much practice on these dummies. And when you're actually out in the real world and in the actual environment, there are so many other factors that we can try to simulate as best as we can. But it's never going to be an exact replica of the real world. You know, like when you think about like a surgeon, maybe something happened right before he walked into, my OR that, has had space in the wrong space. Maybe something had happened at home. Maybe got into an argument with a colleague. Maybe he just had a bad experience or an unfortunate situation with another patient, right? And now he's going to go in and have to perform the surgery on me. And also, I don't know, I'm sure they probably have some sort of checks and balances that if your head's not in the game, you're not going to actually operate, to be clear. But let's just go with this extreme example and then we can apply. We're not trying to, don't get me on the actual context here. Go with my thought process. Maybe, the music wasn't right in the OR. Maybe someone, handed him something in the wrong way. Maybe something was not placed where he normally was. Maybe it is a high stakes situation and he's nervous, and his blood pressure is going. Maybe he didn't eat enough earlier or she didn't eat enough earlier and they're having a bout of, low blood sugar. All of these things can happen that my training did not simulate. So activity is not going to actually tell you, hey, is my doctor actually really ready to deal with the real actual environment? It's also not going to explain, did your work become easier because of this intervention or did it become harder? That's a question we don't ask. So we put a lot of things into place, right? New policies, new processes, new software systems, and we assume that people's lives are going to get easier, and we don't actually know. I had this interesting conversation with someone. He does sales for, I don't know, investment something. I don't know. He does sales. And we were talking about Salesforce, and he's like, yeah, I'm logging all my stuff into Salesforce now. It takes, it's just so annoying having to log all of these things. And I'm laughing. And I'm like, I'm your Salesforce trainer, and we literally train you on how much easier Salesforce is going to make your life and your job, and all of these great things that you can get out of it, and all this data. And, he said, yeah, it's actually a great system for home office. For us reps, it's definitely not helpful for us at all. And so, that brings me back to thinking about evaluation. And one of the questions we rarely do ask is, did your work get easier or harder because of this implementation? And so I think there's multiple reasons for that. But one of the biggest ones is we're also probably just very afraid of what that response is going to be. And whether or not this new thing that we decided to bring in that we thought was going to save our entire company and make, in this example, sales so much easier, and increase our ROI on, all of our sales and things like that, increase our top line or whatever, might not work. Might not actually have been the actual root challenge, but different podcast, different day. Let me know if you want to know more about that one and we'll go back to it. And so that leads us into the next point, right? It's not going to tell us if these systems and tools or even these expectations actually support our success. Are they actually a hindrance? I think so often to one of our customers, I spent some time on the phone. She called in one day, and I probably have talked about this before on the podcast, but she was like, the problem is We're training to policy, but policy doesn't mimic what's happening out in the field. Raise your hand if you've ever heard that one, in your own organization. Obviously hear this, a lot. And, that's just another example, like my sales example, where because we're not actually doing the true work of like evaluation and then really diving into like the analysis and understanding what are we actually looking for to increase and improve. And not just when it comes to training, but when we're actually going to like implement a new system or we're going to implement a new policy. This is what I mean when I say the Kirkpatrick model can do so much more for you outside of just measuring training. You can use the model to help you evaluate whether or not you should even be changing that policy. And was that policy change an actual good change? Look, and there's some policy change that is necessary, don't get me wrong. But okay, we're going to change policy. We have to change policy. Let's do a proper evaluation to know what's the ROI of making that change. We're going to implement a new CRM. Here are the things that we're seeing as problems. And if we can fix these problems, this is what we expect to see an increase on. Like, let's put it all out there and start there and not just say, I think that the system is clunky. I think that the reason that our reps are not pre-planning their calls, the reason they're not maximizing their conversations with their customers is because, the system they have isn't giving them the right data. When in fact, they just feel bogged down by having to put in more information into a system, and they just want to go and be, and their sales reps, and what they want to do is do anything but paperwork. And they want to actually be in front of their customers and spend their time doing that as opposed to, so much time doing administrative work. I think that is actually the root of the challenge that we have. So circling back to our activity metrics, those activity metrics, what they're going to do is they're going to tell you the motion, but they're not going to tell you the momentum that event or intervention actually had. And look, this gap between like giving activity metrics versus, results and performance level metrics, that gap can stay hidden for a very long time. Very long time. Or, I'll hear, well, they're not asking for it, And yeah, you're right. They might not be asking for it, but I can guarantee you they will one day. And they're probably thinking about it. They just, have the list of things that is their priorities, and fires they have to put out. It's going to be one of their lower fires, but eventually they get to it. Eventually they start to look at that fire because that fire grows much bigger and bigger and bigger. And now they've got a really big problem in front of them. It's partly why we're seeing what we're seeing now with the learning industry, right? Budgets are getting cut. They're not coming back. Change is happening to organizations and the way that they function and their roles, the roles that they're asking for, the roles that they need. Eventually, all leaders do sense that they're not getting what they need out of these metrics. They're going to look at the reports. They're going to see the completion rates. They're going to see the positive feedback. But then they're also going to be listening to the halls, listening to what happens out into the field. And they're going to say, these metrics are telling me this, but this is what I'm actually hearing. So wherein lies the problem? Someone is telling me something that's not accurate. And usually they're not going to doubt what it is that they're hearing from the field or from the hallways, because they trust that, because they're actually hearing stories of impact and not just numbers on a pretty report. So when activity metrics, struggle the most is when they're under pressure. And that's where we are right now. You're going to see when your timeline tightens, when performance starts to slip, when risk starts to increase, in those moments, your leaders are not looking for reassurance, right? Like, oh, well, everyone took the training. They all got 100%. We're good. They don't need that reassurance. They're looking for insight. What is happening? Why are we having this challenge? So if you're not doing any of the measurement back into the performance environment, it's not going to be able to tell them that. Your measurement stopped. And your activity metrics aren't going to tell them where the performance is actually breaking down. Because guess what? It might not be your training. It might be because they have no support out in the field. It may be because they haven't been able to practice the skill for 6 months. It may be because they just need additional support and additional guidance and additional reinforcement. Going through one training is not going to help solve the problem. It's not going to tell them why behavior isn't changing. And it's not going to tell them what to adjust next and what to do next. And that's what they're looking for. A lot of leaders are really sick and tired of these reports that they get, these like really big, expensive reports that's going to help uncover all of the problems in front of them and give them all of this data and insight, but not going to tell them what to do next. They don't want the volume. What they want is the clarity. And this is why the Kirkpatrick model was never actually meant to validate activity. It was never about proving that people showed up, they completed a course, or felt satisfied even. Those measures have their place. They're for us that are actually developing. They were never meant to stand in and be a replacement for performance and results. And when activity metrics become this proxy for success, evaluation loses its purpose, and it's hard to believe in it. And it's not because the data is wrong, but it's the fact is the data is incomplete. And one of the things that we explore in the Kirkpatrick Collective is this question of what are you measuring out of habit, not because it helps you make better decisions. So it's something you just do because you always do. And what's a question that you can actually replace it with that's going to help you make a decision? And when you actually think of that question, it totally changes the conversation. And not because it provides an answer for you, but it exposes an assumption. Well, this is the way we've always done it. I mean, I haven't thought, I'm not going to be the one that rocks the boat. This is part of the template. And when we think about activity metrics, know that they're not wrong, but I want you to really think of how useful are they to the story that you're trying to tell, and replace with the ones that you do need to tell that right story. So if measuring more doesn't actually create clarity and measuring activity doesn't explain performance, then our real question is, what kind of evidence should leaders actually trust? And that's where we're going next in our next episode. So y'all make sure you tune in next week where we really dive into more of the actual measurements and metrics that our leaders are looking for. Catch you all in the next episode. Bye.